Good morning, Bruno. My name's Zoe Allen from the Furniture Conservation Studio at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. It's wonderful to be with you all today. Thank you very much to Radek for inviting me and Jürgen to speak and share this day with you. I think I met a few of you last year. We're really sorry not to be with you in person, but very much looking forward to better times, and hopefully next year we can receive you back at the V&A, which will be fantastic. So my talk today is a PowerPoint presentation. It'll last about 20 minutes, and hopefully, technology allowing, we'll have time to tune in and have a discussion together and have the opportunity to answer questions. So fingers crossed that all works well. So I'm going to share my screen with you now. Thank you. So I chose this treatment to share with you today to fit in with the theme of your day, aesthetics and ethics. So the treatment of this pair of stools was very much dictated by the context of the display, where the stools were going to be displayed in the galleries, which of course is quite different to the treatment that perhaps would have happened were they to be treated for where the stools actually belonged at Warwick Castle. Our paper discusses how a pair of gilded and upholstered 18th century stools from the same suite, seen here as they entered in the museum collection, underwent two different conservation treatments for their display in the new furniture gallery, which opened in November 2012 at the Victoria and Albert Museum. One stool was stripped back to reveal the remains of the original upholstery and gilding, while the other was displayed untouched with its various campaigns of recovering and overgilding. We will see how the context of their new display enabled such an unusual treatment choice. The talk will be divided up into the following sections: history of the stools, a technical study of both the upholstery and gilding, the stool's new display setting, and finally conservation treatment. The pair formed part of the state bedroom suite of furniture at Warwick Castle, where the bed, 2 armchairs and 4 other stools remain. The history of the ensemble is uncertain, however. Previous documentation suggests the suite originates from a small luxurious Baroque suite created in 1701 for William III when he visited Hampton Court. In 1703, the suite was moved to Kensington Palace to occupy Queen Anne's state bedchamber, and it was given to the first Earl of Warwick by George III between 1760 and 1773. The stools remained at Warwick Castle until they were sold to the V&A at Sotheby's in London in June 2008. So here's some nice images of the suite of furniture from where the stools came from at Warwick Castle. An illustration from 1844 where you can see one of the stools at the foot of the bed, and on the right you can see a settee and armchair and the other stools. During textile conservation, the cushions were examined, and it was discovered on one of the stools that was thought at first to be an original 18th century upholstery scheme. It was in fact a surprising refurbishment combining some of the original fabric with a later red velvet seen here on the left. Original colourful turquoise and orange figured velvet was found underneath the later red velvet on the cushion side, seen here on the right-hand side. According to archival records, the suite was first refurbished soon after it was introduced to the state bedroom at Warwick Castle in around 1800, due perhaps to the prestigious previous owners and the superior quality of the materials, the upholsterer was careful to incorporate some of the original velvet and trimmings in this new upholstery scheme. The original colourful velvet was therefore reused on the cushion's central panel. An unusual upholstery method was also observed. The valance of the stool is removable and tied down into the base cloth using decorative bows, usually hidden underneath the cushion. The stools may offer a unique surviving example of this technique, and partly explains in the first place the selection of the pair for the upholstery display in the new gallery, which we will see later. Examination of the gilded surface revealed a complex succession of layers representing 3 different periods, seen here on the left. The stools were originally water gilded with the following layer structure: a thick white ground, a thin, loosely bound yellow layer, and red bowl layer and gold leaf. The stools were subsequently partially oil gilded over a thick white ground, roughly applied and wiped off the top high points of the carving. This partial oil gilding was carried out over a translucent oily layer that shows the colour of an oxidized resin. This was possibly an oil-based varnish used as a sealant for the gesso. This was followed by yellow pigmented oil size and gold leaf. Finally, the stools were entirely over-gilded at a later date in a similar fashion. It would be difficult to date with any certainty the different stages of the gilding seen on the stool frames. Some elements in the documentation and the upholstery treatment can, however, be tentatively matched to the layer structure. First, the original water-gilded scheme, as it was first created, can be related to the original velvets. Then comes the partial oil gilding, a record of 1706, 3 years after the suite was adapted for Queen Anne at Kensington Palace, states, Thomas Roberts mended the companion chairs and stools and repaired their gilding. The terms mending and repairing suggest a quick sprucing up rather than a full refurbishment, and could correspond to the first overgilding with its partially applied gesso and oil gilding. Finally, the second overgilding that would be compatible with the important Regency refurbishment undertaken around 1800. It would indeed make sense that the considerable amount of work carried out to the upholstery would tally with a full restoration of the gilded surface. None of this, however, can be proved. The creation of the new furniture galleries was part of the V&A's future plan, an ongoing programme of refurbishment of the building and redisplay of the V&A collections. The new pedagogic gallery showcases over 200 objects from the museum's collection of British and international furniture. The display focuses on questions of form, function, and techniques of construction and decoration in furniture making over a 600-year period. The stools were from the start foreseen to be displayed in a case dedicated to upholstery, to illustrate an example of 18th century upholstery and a rare example of an unusual technique, the bows holding the valance, which we saw before. The interesting facts discovered throughout the technical studies of both the upholstery and the gilding added a new dimension to the pair of stools. They could illustrate a piece of furniture in its original, if residual, aspect, and the transformation of it with time, refurbishment, fashion, and decay. This led to the decision to display one stool showing the remains of the original upholstery and the other in its current early 19th century cover, with its current early 19th century cover. The display of a pair of stools without their original upholstery or gilding, unless the later additions match a traceable historical event, is of limited interest in a museum context such as a technical gallery, as the objects no longer illustrate a specific style. Such an object could give visitors the wrong idea of how a gilded and upholstered Queen Anne stool would have looked at the time of its construction. A well-known issue in art conservation is the dilemma of whether to preserve what remains of the original intention of the artist, or to preserve the many decades of history that an object has accumulated since its creation. One option is to preserve the later scheme and carry out a digital reconstruction of the original. Alternatively, all of the present schemes can be meticulously documented before their removal, taking the object back to its original state. Our close technical analysis led to the conclusion that the original material remaining on the stools was of major informative importance and sufficiently well preserved to be shown. The situation was atypical, as we were dealing with a documented pair of identical stools. We therefore had the unusual opportunity of not having to choose between displaying the stools in either their original or 19th century state. Here are the stools as they are now on display in the upholstery section of the new gallery. By taking one of the stools back to what remains of the original gilding, we were able to showcase a rare survival of an authentic 18th century piece of furniture as designed by the creator. This stool at the front of the case is shown next to its 19th century version as progressively modified over the course of its life. The stools are similar enough that there is no risk of this difference in treatment obscuring their connection as a pair. I'll now briefly discuss the conservation treatment carried out to each of the stools, concentrating on the gilding. When treatment began, the condition of both stools was similar. The later oil gilding was peeling and cupping from the surface. This, together with the thick white ground and oil size of the intermediate gilding layers, obscured much of the original toolwork, such as the cross-hatching and punchwork and crisp recarving in the gesso. The wood was exposed in some areas of loss. Other losses had been retouched with bronze paint, now oxidized to a dull brown. Investigation into the decorative layers found the original water gilding to be in good condition, and despite a normal level of wear and some losses, not unusual for a gilt surface of this age, it still retained beautiful burnished areas and crisp gesso carving. This is the stool which was treated to display the reworked upholstery covers that were applied in about 1800, and is therefore referred to here as the 19th century stool. The over-gilded layers were left intact. Here, the oil-gilded surface was consolidated with rabbit skin glue. The surface was cleaned with triammonium citrate and rinsed with water. The surface was isolated with Larapol mixed with Exol D40 and Shelsol A. Retouching was carried out with both matte and mica-based golden acrylics. The aim of this retouching was to diminish the appearance of the poor condition of the later gilding, to give more of an impression of how the gilding appeared in 1800 to match the contemporary cover. The gilding on the other stool, which was treated to display the original multicolored velvet, was stripped back to the original water gilding. This stool is referred to here as the 18th century stool. The gesso layers applied on top of the original water gilding were very difficult to remove with chemical cleaning methods, as both layers were equally sensitive to the same solvents. The oxidized oily layers applied onto the second gesso layer presented a further challenge, as they were highly resistant to solvents. Furthermore, as the second gilding was only partially applied, cleaning tests produced uneven and unsatisfactory results. All mechanical cleaning attempts also proved unsuccessful. Having exhausted most chemical and mechanical cleaning avenues, and wishing to remain within the safe limits of toxic exposure, we decided to give laser cleaning a try. Being aware that laser can destroy gold leaf, we proceeded very carefully and started our trials on a surface area where the intermediate gesso layer was thick and the laser set at a very low power level. Our tests were very encouraging. Our goal was to try to create a cleavage in the layers to help a chemical cleaning process. Under the laser action, the later gilded layers crack and lift, leaving intact either the original gilded scheme or the dark yellow oil size and white gesso from the first overgilding. Most of the white visible on the left is the ground from the first oil gilding. I will show you the process of the laser cleaning on this cross section. The first sweep of the laser would go down to here, the oxidized layer of the first overgilding. A second sweep would get rid of this hard layer, which was so solvent resistant, and go down to the intermediate gesso layer. Or, if we were lucky, it would go down to the original gilding, creating the peeling effect that you can see on the picture on the right. This was not always systematic, and success probably depended on the presence of intermediate layers such as dust, dirt, or waxy residues protecting the original gilding. Removing the remains of the white ground on the water gilding remained a problem. Use of water had to be avoided as much as possible, as it quickly softened the underlayers, rendering the punchwork and cross-hatched details cut in the original gesso ground extremely sensitive to mechanical work, not to mention the remaining burnished gold leaf. We came up with a gel combining Clucel G and isopropanol mixed with acetic acid to produce a water-free gel, removable with polar solvents with limited effects on water gilding such as isopropanol and ethanol. The high viscosity of the gel was chosen to allow a longer contact time on vertical surfaces. Experiments showed that the gel had to remain on the surface for approximately 45 minutes. The gel surface was then slightly humidified with a damp cotton swab swiftly brushed onto the surface. This immediately softened the gesso to a rubbery consistency that allowed easy removal with metal tools and bamboo sticks. Any residual gel was cleaned with isopropanol. After cleaning, the stool was coated with an isolation layer of Laropol A81 mixed with Exol D40 and Shell Soleil. Retouching was carried out with Gamblin conservation colours, using various shades of red and yellow to match adjacent areas of gold or exposed bowl. No attempt was made to reinstate or recreate the original scheme of the upholstery, and likewise the same approach was taken to the gilding, and no losses were filled, nor was any regilding carried out of areas of wear. The original carved detail can now be read, and the crisply cut gesso work and tooled punch work from the original scheme can now be appreciated. On the screen, we can see the gilded surface on the far right of the screen before treatment. In the centre, the surface cleaned and retouched to illustrate the 19th century scheme, and on the left, on the other stool, the surface treated as we have just described to reveal the 18th century gilding. On a technical level, the resistance to solvents to remove the overgilded layers led to the innovative combination of laser and gel cleaning on the gilded surface, This was the first successful use of laser for treatment of gilded objects at the V&A. The display context in the new furniture gallery enabled something that was usually impossible in art conservation, to show in the same case how an object looked at the time of its creation and how it was subsequently altered. Treatment of the first stool provides a glimpse of the object's original splendor, telling the story of how it first appeared, upholstered with multicolored velvets. Our knowledge of the stool's original display context remains incomplete. However, the quality of the materials and prestigious previous ownership point towards a very grand original setting. The second stool shows the object in the context of its display within the state bedroom at Warwick Castle. It is to be noted that this unusual split treatment was justified by the nature of the V&A as an art and design museum with a mandate to be a schoolroom for everyone. The display of the stools in a technical gallery further validated our decision to treat the objects differently. The original scheme was able to take on value as witness to a technique mainly known before only in text. Both the original upholstery and the original gilding consistently matched the historical documentation, further reinforcing the argument towards displaying one of the stools in its 18th century state. Had the stools remained at Warwick Castle, the idea of stripping could not have been considered. It would have meant destroying an ensemble of great quality and of prestigious history and ownership. It would have rendered the display of the suite somewhat difficult without turning a dynamic historic interior into a more rigid educational form of display. Similarly, the disparity would not fit in a traditional museum display, more orientated to art and history and materials and techniques. Thank you very much. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Kirsten Vedviks and Lea Vedovitz for their help with this project. So thank you very much, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have. I'm going to share with you my email address and also copies of the text that accompany the PowerPoint presentation. So you have time. It's a lot of information to take in to read it in your own time. Well, thank you once more, and very much look forward to seeing you hopefully in person soon. Goodbye.